So let's talk about Ret Tier. Ret's tier right now is really bad. The 2-set practically does nothing. It buffs expurgation damage by 30%, and when you cast Judgment on a target with expurgation applied, it procs Wrathful Sanction, which hits for about 15k. So checking my average damage breakdown of these abilities, expurgation does about 2 to 4% of your damage, sometimes a bit more against things that you can cleave against. But wait a second, the tier is only 15% of that, so in reality, it's increasing your damage by 0.3 to 0.6%. Then, on average, Wrathful Sanction is doing about 1 to 2% of your damage, depending on cleave versus not cleave. So the 2-set is about a 1 to 2.6% damage buff. 1 is the more relevant number, because the 2.6 is generally going to be against pet cleave. Now, since the 2-set is this bad, surely the 4-set makes up for it, right? Well, not really. Ret's 4-set makes it so that whenever you proc Wrathful Sanction, it increases the damage of your next Templars by 12.5%. So how much damage is that? Well, on average, Templars is going to be doing 25 to 30% of your damage. So let's say on average, it's 28%. So 12.5% of 28% is about 3.5%. Kind of decent, right? Well, at most, we're going to be getting this buff 50% of the time. Since we use the talent that makes it so that we get 2 stacks of judgment whenever we judge, so now it's down to 1.75%, and that's assuming we only Templars with judgment up every single time. Sometimes you can't. So let's combine all of this together. We get a 2.75 to 4.35 damage buff from tier. Keep in mind that all our tier does is directly increase our damage. Now let's compare this to Warrior. Now Warrior's tier set is amazing. It causes Ren to do more damage and proc Execute, which then casts Thunderclap, which applies Rend and also increases the damage of Execute procs. It works super harmoniously. Now as you can see, we can't really test the damage buff of the increased Execute procs, but let's test this. So on average, Rend is dealing 10 to 15% damage. Let's say it's an average of 12.5%. Now the tier is 15% of this. So a 1.5 to 2.2% damage buff just from the damaging part of the 2-set. Now the 4-set is a lot easier to calculate since it's direct damage. So the 4-set casts Thunderclap and also uses Execute procs to apply a bleed. So the bleed on average does 2 to 3% of your damage, and Thunderclaps are about 4% of your damage. So that means Warrior tier is adding up about 7 to 9% of your damage, not even including the increased rate of Execute procs, or the added globals you get from not having to press Rend as much. So it's doing twice as much damage as Ret's tier, and also providing a more fluid rotation, while Ret's can make yours clunkier if you're trying to play around it. But overall, I recommend not playing tier. Just focus on getting perfect stats, and maybe in the future, if we decide we don't need as much burst, we can use the Haste Mastery tier pieces just for free. Hopefully Blizzard does something for Ret tier in the future. I can't imagine it's even good in PvE, so there is a chance to make some changes. My recommendations are to first completely unnerf it in PvP. So Wrathful Sanction would be doing twice as much damage, and we'd be getting a 25% damage buff to Templars after it. This would at least give us some reason to somewhat change our rotation. It might make us want to apply Judgment more often, or actually play around the 4-set damage buff on goes. And the last thing I'd want them to change is the 2-set from a 30% damage buff for expurgation to a 100% damage buff to expurgation. The talent feels like it does nothing. It provides practically no damage and is completely unnoticeable. It's a really weird talent to base Ret's entire tier set around, even weirder when it does so little. But that's all for me. Hope you guys enjoyed. Peace.